Hey, I'm Janis of Pass with Janis, and welcome to my channel. I'm going to talk a story time today. I love teaching real estate so that you can pass the exam. And since I've been a broker for the past 29 years ish, more, depending on when you're seeing this video, I have stories that could blow your freaking mind. And every time I go through one of these deals and I'm stressed out and I'm like, why is this happening? I remind myself that someday I can tell this as a story to my students. And so when it happens, I'm like, this is great because it can help other people learn. So I'm going to talk a little bit about co ownership today. And I have two stories that come to the top of my mind of real life situations where co ownership happened, where it mattered, and it's going to hopefully help you understand it a little bit better. If you like this video, make sure you like it, hit the subscribe so you don't miss any videos. I comment here all the time and I'm posting new stories as they come up. So you don't want to miss a thing. So I firmly believe that when you're getting ready to pass the real estate exam, the number one thing with the content is that you understand it. A lot of people are telling you to memorize it, and we have flashcards, like we have all those things. And sometimes you just forget stuff and you have to memorize it. You just mix up the terms. But if you understand them, like you really understand them, you're not going to have to think so hard because you're just going to know what it is. And so that's why story time comes in. So here we go. A couple of years ago, and sometimes I go off on little zigzags, but the reason I go off on little zigzags is because real estate, well, life itself is not linear. It's all connected. And so sometimes I veer off on little zigzags to talk about how to build your business or to talk about other terms in real estate that come up. So just strap on your seatbelt and hang on because it might be a bumpy ride. All right. So a couple of years ago, I had this client. She was a buyer and I was helping her buy a house. Now, her situation was she was married and she owned a property with her spouse. And it was a primary residence, it's where they live, but they were splitting up. And unfortunately, as some divorces and separations go, it wasn't the most amicable of situations. And so my client was getting ready to move out of her house and to buy something so that she could live on her own. In order, she had great credit, she had great income, great assets, all the things, but she was on the mortgage with her wife. And that monthly payment of that mortgage was counting against her debt to income ratio. Maybe we'll do a little video on debt to income ratio. So that was counting against her debt to income ratio, which means she didn't qualify. She didn't have enough income to qualify for the primary residence mortgage payment that she was already living in and the new property she wanted to buy. It was simple. She had to sell or get off the mortgage of the primary residence with wife. So she talked to her wife and she was like, yo, do you want to keep the house and buy me out? Or do you want to move and I'll buy you out? And if she bought the wife out, she wouldn't have bought a house with me. But the wife said, I'm staying, I'll buy you out. So my client was like, cool. So we started looking for houses. We found a house. We put the offer in. The offer was accepted. She's now applying for the mortgage, and her lender is saying to her, you have to get your name off of that primary residence mortgage with your soon to be ex wife because you can't carry all that debt. You can't qualify. And so my client went to her soon to be ex wife, who she was still living with at the time, and she said, you got to buy me out. And the soon to be ex wife was like, nope. What? Nope. She would not buy her out. So here's the dilemma. First of all, they were co-owners and tenants by the entireties. Now, not all states recognize tenants by the entireties, but it's going to show up on your national exam because it's a thing. And it means that it's reserved only for married people. Only married people can hold title as tenants by the entireties. Married people don't have to hold title as tenants by the entireties, but they're the only ones that are allowed to do so. And they happen to hold title as tenants by the entireties, which means the law treats them, right? Because they were married, they were happy, they were in love. So it treats them as like one happy joined married person. It treats them almost as an indivisible person, even though they're really two people. So rather than owning 50-50, they own an indivisible 100% share. They're connected. It's like they're intertwined. They're a mesh. They're in love, right? They're one person. They're connected. They own this together. And the only way to split it up, because if you remember Jay's dad, the only way they can split it up is judgment, death, agreement, or divorce. So they were getting a divorce, but they hadn't gotten a divorce yet. And my client's name was still on title. So she's stuck. And so now what happens? Here's what you need to understand about co-ownership is that if my client owns a property with somebody and my client wants out, or the other one wants out, my client wants out. The only way out would be if the wife bought her out or if she bought the wife out by agreement. But she wasn't agreeing. So now what happens? What happens? My buyer is stuck. She's stuck. She's stuck. Can the ex-wife, soon to be ex-wife, keep her hostage forever and say, you're going to own this house with me forever until death do us part? No, but she could sure make it difficult. So the only way that my client had a remedy, a way out, was to go to the court and be like, yo, this person, right? My ex-wife said she's going to buy me out. She's not buying me out. We're getting a divorce. I'm done. I'm over it. I want out. Either she's got to buy me out or I have to buy her out or whatever. But now she's playing games and she's keeping me held hostage. And what the court will do is the court is going to look at the case and they're going to say, she can't hold you hostage. She can't. If she doesn't want to buy you out, or she won't let you buy her out, or you guys can't come to some sort of agreement, we, the court, are going to step in and we're going to order a partition. So my client had to go to court and file a partition suit, meaning a lawsuit to force this soon-to-be ex-wife to part ways with her and force her to either buy out my client or the court will force a sale of the property and make the ex-wife or soon-to-be ex-wife sign and sell the property, or the court will do it. The court will order it. It has to be done. And that is the only way that my buyer was able to get out of it. Now, in the meantime, truth be told, there wasn't enough time to get that done prior to my buyer going to closing. And normally you would get the partition suit done first before you went ahead and put yourself under contract to buy another property, because my buyer knew she wasn't going to qualify for both mortgages, but she didn't. And you know why she didn't? Because the ex-wife told her she was going to let her out. She told her, she said, I'll buy you out. So my client believed it. And that's the only reason she went forward and put in an offer and got accepted and was ready to buy this property. So now she's stuck and she's not going to get her mortgage. And this offer, this deal was contingent upon financing. So remember that. See, I told you it's all connected, right? It was contingent upon financing. We baked it into the agreement of sale. And that way, my buyer said in the agreement of sale, and the seller accepted it, so it was binding. My buyer said, I'm buying this house contingent so long as I'm able to obtain mortgage financing. And she wasn't able to obtain mortgage financing because she couldn't get rid of the other mortgage on the primary residence. So what happened? Well, she would have had to terminate and she would have been entitled to her deposit monies back based on the mortgage contingency clause. But she didn't have to because we saved the day. And here was what we did until she was able to get out from under that primary residence. She was able to find a very good friend. In fact, the friend that referred her to me, which is the business lesson, and that friend co-signed the mortgage for her. They literally co-signed. That's how good of friends they are. Co-signed and said that they were going to be responsible if she stopped paying the mortgage. And with the co-signer and the co-signer's added income, the two of them together qualified and she was able to close. And it took about 6 more months for her to go through with that partition suit and have the court force a sale of that other property, at which time she then didn't have that debt that she was carrying. And you know what she was able to do? She was able to go to a new lender and refinance that old mortgage and get her cosigner off so that he was no longer responsible for that loan. So that's what tenants by the entireties is. And that's what a partition suit is. Also, we have to talk about debt to income ratio. And I'm going to do another video on mortgages, and I'll link that in the comments below. So now's another story. And this is one of my students. And she had this situation where she was married and she owned property as tenants by the entireties with her husband. But then they got divorced. After they got divorced, he went off and he married somebody else and they bought a house together. So now my client is still living in the home, the marital home that she had with her ex husband. And now it's a few years later. And now she's getting married again. She's happy. She's met someone else. It's her second chance and she's marrying this guy. And she asked me, can I put him on title? And I said, well, what's going on? And she explained that she owned this house with her ex husband. And I was like, okay, well, what happened? And she said, well, we got divorced and then he got remarried and then he bought another property. And I said, well, sure, you just have to have him sign off. And she said, unfortunately, he can't. And I was like, why? And she said, he died. And I said, oh shit. Because here's what happened. They owned property as tenants by the entireties, meaning the law treated them as one happy, unified person, and they owned the whole thing together as an indivisible 100% share. And how do we dissolve tenants by the entireties? JSDAT. Judgment, death, agreement, meaning agreement of the parties, or divorce. Well, there was a death and there was a divorce, and it just so happens that the divorce happened first. When the divorce happens, what happens to tenants by the entireties? Because tenants by the entireties treats it as one person, and it's only available for married people. So if there's a divorce, the people are no longer married. And how can unmarried people hold title? They have two choices. They can hold it as tenants in common or joint tenants with right of survivorship. Tenants in common means that when one person dies, their shares go to their heirs according to their will or to the state laws of descent and distribution. And when the other person dies, the same happens with their shares. With joint tenants with right of survivorship, when this person dies, the shares automatically go to the other person and vice versa. But when you have tenants by the entireties and there's a divorce, what happens? Tenants by the entireties dissolves and it automatically goes to tenants in common, which means she owns her shares and upon her death, they go to her heirs. He owns his shares and upon his death, it goes on to his heirs. Well, he moved out and married somebody else and bought another house, but his name was still on this title. His name was still on title, which means he owned 50% of this property up until the day he died. Now he's dead. He's been dead for a few years and he's got a new wife. And he has a child or two. So what happens to the house that she's living in that belongs half to this ex-husband's estate? She has to settle with the estate. She has to go and figure out, did he have a will? If he did have a will, whoever was named in his will gets his half of her property. If he did not have a will, they have to open an estate with the court and figure out who's got his shares. That's what happens when tenants by the entireties is dissolved because of divorce. Now, if they were tenants by the entireties and the other D happened first, If the death happened first, then what happens? Well, since they own the property together as tenants by the entireties and he dies, his shares automatically go to her. He just disappears and she owns the whole thing. And now the new wife and the kids have nothing to do with it because it's all hers. So now you understand tenants by the entireties and you can pass it on the real estate exam. Follow along for more videos and let me know in the comments something that you're confused about so I can explain it to you.